During dinner, my uncle slammed the door in my face and said I wasn't family, then kicked me out. My name is Maya, and I've been the family ghost for as long as I can remember. At 28, I've perfected the art of being simultaneously essential and invisible, called when they need something moved, forgotten when invitations are handed out. Growing up, I learned early that love in our house came with conditions I could never meet. My mother had this way of speaking that could slice through bone, always finding the exact words that would leave the deepest cuts. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. My sister was everything I wasn't: graceful, charming, the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly become its center. I was the reliable one, the one who helped with groceries, who remembered birthdays when everyone else forgot, who showed up early to help set up and stayed late to clean. But reliable doesn't get you a seat at the table when it matters. Reliable gets you a phone call at 10 p.m., asking if you can pick up something they forgot at the store. The pattern established itself so early I thought it was normal. Family gatherings where my achievements were glossed over in 30 seconds, but my sister's latest promotion, relationship, or vacation got discussed for hours. I'd sit there, contributing when spoken to, laughing at the right moments, playing my part as the supportive background character in their story. By my mid-20s, I started keeping mental tallies. How many times had I been asked to help versus how many times I'd been genuinely asked how I was doing? The ratio was embarrassing. I'd drive 40 minutes to help my uncle move furniture, then not hear from him for months until he needed something else repaired. Last year, I missed my own birthday celebration because I was helping my cousin move into her new apartment. When I finally arrived at the restaurant 2 hours late, they'd already ordered dessert and were getting ready to leave. "Oh, we figured you weren't coming," my mother said with that particular tone she reserved for my disappointments. I've spent years trying to decode what I did wrong. What fundamental flaw made me so easy to overlook? Was it because I never demanded attention the way my sister did? Because I didn't throw tantrums when I felt ignored? Because I just accepted it? The truth is, I've been auditioning for love my entire life, and somehow I never got the part. I became the person who everyone counted on, but no one really saw. The one who would always show up, always help out, always be there, until suddenly I wouldn't be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story really begins 3 months ago, when I finally realized that being reliable had become my prison, and sometimes the only way out is to stop being who everyone expects you to be. I spent 3 years between ages 25 and 28 trying to crack the code of family acceptance. I studied them like they were a foreign language I needed to master, convinced that if I just tried harder, gave more, showed up more consistently, eventually they'd see me as worthy. The gift phase was particularly pathetic. I'd show up to casual dinners with expensive wine nobody asked for, flowers for no special occasion, thoughtful presents that demonstrated how much I listened to their passing comments. My sister mentioned wanting to try yoga. I bought her a premium mat and blocks. My uncle complained about his old coffee maker. I researched for weeks and bought him a top-of-the-line espresso machine. "You don't have to do this," they'd say. But I could never tell if they meant it or if it was just polite deflection. The gifts were received with thanks that felt hollow, stored away in closets or regifted to others. I once found the expensive scarf I'd given my mother at a church donation bin, still in its original packaging. I volunteered for everything: moving help, airport runs, babysitting, house sitting. I became the family's unpaid concierge service. When my cousin needed someone to watch her cats for a week, I rearranged my vacation days. When my aunt needed help organizing her garage sale, I spent an entire weekend pricing items and dealing with strangers trying to haggle over her old dishes. The most humiliating part was how eager I was to help. I'd practically jump at the opportunity to be useful, as if each favor was a deposit in some imaginary account that would eventually pay out in genuine affection. I convinced myself that their requests meant they trusted me, valued me, needed me. But being needed and being wanted are entirely different things, and I learned that lesson over and over again. I was invited to help set up for parties, but never asked to join the planning conversations. I was asked to take family photos, but rarely included in them. I was the designated driver, but never the one whose opinion mattered when choosing where to go. The breaking point came at my sister's engagement party last spring. I'd spent the entire day helping my mother cook and decorate, arriving at 6 a.m. to prep vegetables and staying until midnight to clean up. During the party, I watched from the kitchen as my family told stories about my sister's childhood, sharing memories and laughing together while I washed dishes. When my uncle raised a toast to all the people who made this celebration possible, his eyes swept right past me to the caterers we'd hired for the main course. I was standing 10 feet away, apron still tied around my waist, and I might as well have been invisible. That night, driving home exhausted and ignored once again, I started to understand something crucial. My efforts weren't invisible because I wasn't trying hard enough. They were invisible because my family had decided long ago that I was the supporting cast member. And no amount of dedicated performance was going to change that casting decision. The revelation should have freed me, but instead it terrified me. If I stopped trying so hard, would they miss me at all? Or would they simply find someone else to fill the role of family helper? 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I made a decision that felt revolutionary at the time. I wasn't going to volunteer to help with the family dinner. I wasn't going to ask what I could bring, wasn't going to offer to arrive early for prep, wasn't going to automatically assume I was invited just because I was family. The silence was deafening. November 20th came and went without a single call about menu planning or table arrangements. November 25th passed without anyone asking if I could pick up extra chairs or help set up the dining room. By the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I'd convinced myself that this was it. I'd finally succeeded in making myself truly invisible. Then my phone rang. It was my youngest cousin, the only person in my family who had ever treated me like an actual human being rather than a convenient service provider. At 19, she possessed the kind of unfiltered honesty that everyone else in our family had trained out of themselves years ago. "Are you really not coming to Thanksgiving?" she asked without preamble. "Nobody invited me," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "That's stupid. You always come to Thanksgiving." "I always help with Thanksgiving. That's different." There was a pause, and I could practically hear her processing this distinction. "Mom asked me to call you," she finally admitted. "She said to tell you that dinner's at Uncle's house at 3. Same as always." "She asked you to invite me?" "Not exactly. She said to tell you about dinner and see if you were planning to show up and help like usual." The casualness of it hit me like a slap. Not, "Invite Maya to join us," but see if Maya's planning to show up and help. Even my invitation was framed around my utility. "I don't think I'm going to make it this year," I heard myself saying. "Maya, please." Her voice got smaller. "It's going to be so boring without you there. My mom and your sister just talk about people I don't know, and Uncle gets all weird and political after his second beer. You're literally the only person who talks to me like I'm not 12. You could always come have dinner with me instead," I offered half-heartedly, knowing she wouldn't. "You know I can't do that. It would cause World War III. She was right, of course. In our family, loyalty was expected to flow upward through the hierarchy, and a 19-year-old choosing to have dinner with the family, disappointment instead of attending the official gathering, would be seen as an act of rebellion requiring swift punishment. "Just come," she pleaded. "Please, for me?" And there it was, the one argument I couldn't resist. Not because I wanted to subject myself to another holiday of being ignored and taken for granted, but because she was asking. Because in a family full of people who only contacted me when they needed something, she was the one person who contacted me just because she wanted to talk. "Okay," I said. "I'll come." "Really?" "Really. But I'm not helping with setup and I'm not staying to clean." "Deal," she said quickly, like she was afraid I might change my mind. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, wondering what I'd just agreed to. I'd spent months building up the courage to set boundaries, only to crumble the moment someone I cared about asked me to cross them. But maybe this time would be different. Maybe showing up without offering to help, without bringing an elaborate dish, without arriving early to prove my worth, would force them to see me differently. Maybe they'd finally understand that I was choosing to be there, not just defaulting to being useful. I should have known better. Hope, when you're desperate for family acceptance, can be the cruelest emotion of all. I drove the 43 minutes to my uncle's house in suburban Millbrook on Thanksgiving afternoon with my stomach churning. I deliberately arrived 15 minutes after the official start time, not early enough to be expected to help, not late enough to be considered rude. The house was already full of cars when I pulled up. I could hear the familiar sounds of family gathering through the windows, multiple conversations, laughter, the clatter of serving dishes. For just a moment, sitting in my car, I felt that old surge of anticipation. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe walking in as a guest rather than an unpaid staff member would shift something fundamental. I walked up the brick pathway carrying only my purse and a bottle of wine, not the expensive kind I used to bring, just a decent bottle from the grocery store, the kind a normal person brings to a normal dinner party. I knocked, then tried the door handle like I had countless times before. Locked. That was unusual. My uncle's front door was never locked during family gatherings. I knocked again, louder this time. The door opened, but only about 6 inches. My uncle's face appeared in the gap, and something in his expression made my stomach drop. He looked uncomfortable, almost guilty, but also resolute in a way that reminded me of my mother when she'd made up her mind about something. "Maya," he said, not moving to open the door wider. "Hi, Uncle. Sorry I'm a little late. Traffic was heavier than I expected. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Behind him, I could see into the dining room. The table was set for exactly the number of people who were there. No empty chair, no extra place setting. Someone was already sitting in what had traditionally been my spot, my sister's boyfriend, the one who'd been dating her for exactly 3 months. "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand perfectly. "This is a family dinner, Maya. Family only." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I am family?" "No," he said, and his voice carried the kind of finality that suggested this wasn't a spontaneous decision. "You're not. Not anymore." "What are you talking about? What does that even mean?" "It means you need to leave. We don't want you here." I looked past him again, desperately searching for some sign that this was a mistake, a prank, anything other than what it appeared to be. My mother was visible in the kitchen, clearly aware of what was happening at the front door. She glanced over once, made eye contact with me, then deliberately turned away. "I was invited," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "My cousin called me. She shouldn't have done that." "This was discussed. The decision was made." "What decision? Who discussed what?" "The family discussed it. You cause problems, Maya. You make people uncomfortable. It's better this way." I felt like I was falling, like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. "I cause problems? I'm the one who's always helping everyone, always showing up, always making people feel guilty with that martyr act," he interrupted. "Always making everything about you and how hard you try and how unappreciated you are." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not just the words, but the calculation behind them. This hadn't happened in the heat of an argument. This was planned, discussed, decided upon. They'd deliberately waited until I was standing on the doorstep to deliver the blow. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious." "Go home, Maya. Find somewhere else to spend your holiday." Through the window, I could see my sister laugh at something someone said. My cousin, the one who'd begged me to come, was staring at her phone, refusing to look toward the door. The whole scene had a surreal quality, like I was watching a play about my own life. "Close the door, please," I heard my uncle say to someone behind him, and then it closed. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I stood there for a moment, wine bottle still in my hand, unable to process what had just happened. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and sat in the driver's seat staring at the house where my family was having Thanksgiving dinner without me. That's when I realized I wasn't surprised. Hurt, devastated, angry, yes, but not surprised. Some part of me had always known this moment was coming. I drove home in a daze, but by the time I pulled into my apartment complex, something had shifted inside me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and more focused. They thought they'd ambushed me, but they had no idea I'd been preparing for this moment for months. You see, I'd started recording our family interactions back in August. Not with any malicious intent initially. I'd begun therapy that summer, and my therapist had suggested I keep a journal of family interactions to help identify patterns. But when I mentioned how often I felt gaslit after family gatherings, how I'd leave questioning my own memory of events, she'd suggested something more concrete. "Sometimes having an objective record helps," she'd said. "It's hard to argue with audio." So I'd started using the voice memo app on my phone during family gatherings, just dropping it casually in my purse, hitting record before walking into rooms where family was gathered. Initially, I thought I'd catch evidence of how helpful I was, how much I contributed. Instead, I caught something else entirely. I caught my mother telling my sister that I was exhausting to deal with, while I was literally in the next room making her dinner. I caught my uncle complaining about how I always needed to be the center of attention during a conversation that happened while I was washing his dishes. I caught my sister laughing about how I tried too hard with gift giving, mocking the thoughtfulness I'd put into choosing presents for them. The most devastating recording was from my cousin's birthday party in October. While I was outside loading leftover cake into my car for an elderly neighbor who couldn't attend, my family had a 15-minute conversation about how Maya always makes everything about herself and how exhausting it was to deal with my neediness. By November, I had nearly 2 hours of audio footage of my family discussing me like I was a burden they were all forced to bear. Me, the the person who dropped everything to help them, who never said no to their requests, who bent over backward trying to prove I deserved their love. After they closed the door in my face on Thanksgiving, I went home and spent 3 hours editing those recordings into a 5-minute compilation. The most revealing moments, the clearest examples of their duplicity. My mother's voice saying I was too much work while I organized her entire kitchen. My uncle calling me pathetic while I fixed his broken fence. My sister joking about how I probably think we actually appreciate all that crap she does. I saved the file with a simple title, What They Really Think. Then I opened my contacts and selected 12 people. My father, who'd stayed distant from family drama but needed to know what his ex-wife was saying about his daughter. My maternal grandmother, who always asked why I looked so tired after family gatherings. A few aunts and uncles from my mother's side who'd always been kind to me but might not know the full story. My cousin who'd invited me to dinner because she deserved to know the truth about what her request had cost me. I attached the audio file to a group message and typed, "Since I was told today that I'm no longer family and was barred from Thanksgiving dinner, I thought you should know what your family members really think about the person who's been showing up for all of you for years. This is 5 minutes of recordings from the past 3 months. There's much more where this came from." My finger hovered over the send button for almost 10 minutes. Once I sent this, there would be no going back. No more pretending, no more hoping things would change, no more accepting crumbs and calling them love. But as I sat there in my quiet apartment, thinking about the sound of that door closing, thinking about my sister's boyfriend sitting in my chair while I was turned away like a stranger, something crystallized inside me. They'd made their choice about who I was to them. Now it was time for everyone else to see what that choice really looked like. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and made myself a Thanksgiving dinner for one. The first honest meal I'd had with family, or without them, in years. I kept my phone off for exactly 18 hours. When I finally turned it back on Friday morning, I had 67 missed calls and over 100 text messages. The phone immediately started ringing again, my uncle's number flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail and started scrolling through the messages instead. The responses fell into 3 distinct categories. Confused questions from people who hadn't listened to the audio yet, supportive messages from those who had, and increasingly frantic damage control attempts from my mother and uncle. My grandmother had been the first to respond, just 2 hours after I'd sent the message. "Honey, I listened to your recording. I had no idea they talked about you this way. This is heartbreaking. Call me when you're ready." My father, who I rarely heard from, "I'm disgusted. Your mother and I need to have a conversation. Are you okay?" But the real revelation was in the messages from extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles I rarely saw except at major holidays. One by one, they were sharing their own experiences. "Maya, this explains so much. I always wondered why you looked so sad at family gatherings," from my aunt who lived in Oregon. "They've been talking about me the same way for years. I just never had proof," from a cousin I barely knew. "Your mother tried to call me 3 times last night, demanding I delete the message without listening to it. That told me everything I needed to know," from my great-uncle. The desperate messages from my mother and uncle painted a clear picture of panic. They'd gone from angry denials to attempts at explanation to outright begging within the span of a few hours. "Uncle, that recording was taken out of context. You're destroying this family over a misunderstanding." "Mother, I can't believe you would secretly record private conversations. This is a betrayal of the worst kind." Then, as more people listened and responded with their own stories of witnessing the family's treatment of me, the messages from my mother became increasingly unhinged. "You've poisoned everyone against me with your lies and manipulation. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. You're not my daughter anymore. You never deserved this family." That last message actually made me laugh out loud. I'd already been told I wasn't family anymore, by my uncle, with her silent approval. She was just catching up to her own decision. The most important message came from my young cousin around noon. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Mom and Uncle talked about you like that when you weren't around. I feel sick. I never should have asked you to come yesterday. I'm leaving Uncle's house right now. Can I come see you?" She showed up at my apartment an hour later, crying before I even opened the door fully. We sat on my couch while she apologized over and over for unwittingly setting me up for yesterday's humiliation. "I really thought they just forgot to invite you properly," she said. "I had no idea they planned to do that to you. It's not your fault," I told her, and meant it. "You were the only person who wanted me there. I still want you. This whole family is insane without you. Do you know what happened after you sent that recording?" I shook my head. People started leaving. Uncle's house cleared out by 8 p.m. Grandma called Mom and Uncle and told them she was ashamed to be related to them. Dad called Mom and screamed at her for 20 minutes. Everyone's taking sides, and honestly, most people are taking yours. As she talked, my phone kept buzzing with new messages. More family members asking for the full recordings. More people sharing their own stories of how my mother and uncle had talked about them behind their backs. More cracks appearing in the perfect family facade they'd worked so hard to maintain. I realized something profound sitting there with my cousin. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to manage other people's emotions or fix other people's problems. I wasn't rushing to apologize or smooth things over or take responsibility for everyone else's feelings. I had simply told the truth and let everyone else figure out what to do with it. By Saturday, my family's carefully constructed social media presence was crumbling in real time. My mother, who prided herself on her curated image of family perfection, made the catastrophic decision to post on social media about what she called the betrayal of a troubled family member. Her post was a masterclass in victim manipulation. Sometimes loving someone means accepting that they're not healthy enough to be part of your life. It breaks my heart to share that we had to make the difficult decision to ask my daughter to leave our family gathering after years of increasingly concerning behavior. I'm sharing this because I know some of you received disturbing messages from her, and I want you to know that we're getting her the help she needs. Please keep our family in your prayers during this difficult time. The post backfired spectacularly. Within hours, family members were commenting with their own experiences. My grandmother was the first. The only concerning behavior I've witnessed is how you've treated that girl for years. She's been nothing but devoted to this family, and you've repaid her kindness with cruelty. My father, who rarely engaged with social media, created an account specifically to respond. I've listened to the audio Maya shared. Anyone who wants to understand the real story should listen to it too. What I heard was a young woman being systematically emotionally abused by people who should have been protecting her. The comments section became a battlefield. Extended family members, family friends, even neighbors weighed in with their observations of family dynamics over the years. People shared stories of witnessing my mother's cutting remarks, my uncle's dismissive treatment, the way I was consistently overlooked and undervalued. I always wondered why Maya looked so exhausted at family parties, wrote a family friend. Now I understand she was working the entire time while being treated like an unwelcome guest. Maya was the only one who visited my mom when she was in the hospital last year, another cousin added. Where was everyone else? The most devastating comment came from my elderly neighbor, who I'd been helping with groceries and yard work for 3 years. Maya brings me leftover food from family gatherings because she says there's always too much. Now I realize she was probably bringing me her own portion because she wasn't really welcome to eat with them. My phone became unusable from the constant notifications. Messages of support poured in from people I hadn't spoken to in years, high school friends who'd met my family, college roommates who'd witnessed phone calls, co-workers who'd heard me make excuses for why I couldn't attend their events because I was helping family. The pattern they painted was devastating and consistent. Years of me prioritizing family obligations over my own life, relationships, and opportunities, while being treated as an afterthought by the very people I kept sacrificing for. My therapist had an emergency session with me on Saturday evening. Maya, I need you to understand something, she said after I'd filled her in on the past few days. What you're experiencing right now, this validation, this support, this is what normal families do when one member is being mistreated. They rally around the victim, not the abusers. It feels surreal, I admitted. I spent so many years thinking I was the problem. That's what emotional abuse does. It makes you question your own reality, your own worth, your own memories. But look at what happened the moment you provided objective evidence of how you were being treated. People immediately recognized it as wrong. That evening, my cousin texted me screenshots from a group chat I wasn't part of. A conversation between my mother, sister, and uncle trying to coordinate their response to the public relations disaster they'd created. We need to control the narrative, my mother had written. Maya has always been unstable. People need to understand that we were protecting ourselves. Maybe we should just apologize and try to smooth things over, my sister had suggested. Absolutely not, my uncle had responded. Apologizing admits wrongdoing. We stick to the story that Maya is troubled and we made a difficult but necessary decision. Reading their cold calculation while dozens of people were publicly defending me was like watching the final pieces of a puzzle fall into place. They weren't sorry about how they'd treated me. They were sorry they'd been caught. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was still in my pajamas, nursing my second cup of coffee and reading through more supportive messages, when there was a soft knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw my father standing awkwardly on my doorstep, holding what looked like a bag of groceries. I hadn't seen him in person in over a year. After my parents' messy divorce when I was 16, he'd maintained a careful distance from anything involving my mother's side of the family. He paid child support, remembered my birthday, and occasionally took me to dinner, but family drama was strictly off-limits. "Dad?" I opened the door, confused. "What are you doing here?" "I brought breakfast," he said, lifting the bag. "Figured you might not have been eating much the past few days." I let him in, still processing his presence. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but there was something different in his expression, a kind of determined sadness I'd never seen before. He unpacked the bag on my kitchen counter. Bagels, cream cheese, orange juice, fresh fruit. The kind of simple, thoughtful gesture that my mother would have complicated with criticism about my eating habits or unsolicited advice about my lifestyle choices. "I listened to the recordings," he said without preamble as he poured orange juice into 2 glasses. "All of them. The full versions your cousin sent me." I felt my cheeks burn. "Dad, I wasn't trying to drag you into—" "Maya." His voice was firm but gentle. "I need to apologize to you, and I need you to let me do it without making excuses for me. Okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I knew," he said simply. "Maybe not the specifics, but I knew your mother treated you differently than your sister. I knew you were always the one expected to help, expected to give, expected to accommodate everyone else's needs. And I said nothing because it was easier for me to stay out of it than to fight battles I thought I couldn't win." He sat down across from me at my small kitchen table, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug like he was trying to warm himself. "After the divorce, I told myself I was protecting you by staying neutral. But there's no such thing as neutral when someone you love is being hurt. Silence is a choice, and I chose wrong. You couldn't have known it was this bad," I said automatically, falling back into my old pattern of managing other people's guilt. "Yes, I could have. I should have. Every time you canceled plans with me because your mother needed help with something. Every time you looked exhausted when I picked you up for dinner. Every time you apologized for things that weren't your fault. Those were signs I chose to ignore." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Terrified for you, worried about the fallout, but proud. It took courage I'm not sure I would have had." We ate breakfast mostly in silence, but it was comfortable in a way I'd forgotten was possible with family. No undercurrents of criticism, no walking on eggshells, no performing gratitude for basic kindness. "What happens now?" I asked finally. "Now I do what I should have done years ago. I support my daughter. Your mother called me Friday night, screaming about how you'd destroyed the family and demanding I talk sense into you. I told her the only person who destroyed this family was her." "How did she react to that?" "About as well as you'd expect. But Maya, I need you to understand something. This isn't your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix. Your mother made choices about how to treat you, and now she's dealing with the consequences of those choices. That's how life works for adults." After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Unconditional support from a parent. Not support contingent on my behavior, my usefulness, or my willingness to accept mistreatment. Just support because I was his daughter and he loved me. That afternoon, he sent me a text. "I'm taking your grandmother to lunch tomorrow. She wants to make sure you know you have family who actually values you. Would you like to join us?" For the first time since Thursday, I smiled without forcing it. Maybe I was losing the family I'd been born into, but I was finding the family I deserved. December arrived with a series of phone calls I'd been anticipating, but my family clearly hadn't. The first came on December 3rd, my uncle's panicked voice on my answering machine. "Maya, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the property tax payment on the rental house. The county says it's overdue, but I thought you were handling that. Call me back." I deleted the message without responding. He could figure out his own property taxes. For 3 years, I'd been quietly managing financial obligations for various family members. It had started small. My mother mentioning she was behind on her car payment after an expensive dental procedure, my uncle needing help covering property taxes on his rental property during a slow period for his contracting business. I'd stepped in because that's what family does, right? Except temporary help had become permanent dependence, and loans had become gifts that were never acknowledged, let alone repaid. I had spreadsheets tracking it all, $28,000 over 3 years. Money that came out of my savings, my retirement contributions, my plans for the future. The property tax situation was particularly galling. My uncle owned 3 rental properties, but somehow never managed to save for the annual tax bills. For 2 years running, I'd received frantic calls in November about impending tax sales, and I'd quietly transferred $4,000 each time to keep his properties from being seized. In return, I got to hear him complain at family gatherings about entitled millennials who don't understand hard work. My mother's situation was more complex. After the divorce, she'd struggled financially but refused to downsize from the house she couldn't afford. Rather than face reality, she'd learned to call me whenever bills became overwhelming. Her car payment, her credit card minimums, her homeowner's insurance. I'd become her unofficial financial safety net, all while listening to her criticize my lack of financial responsibility because I rented an apartment instead of buying a house. My sister's needs were the most infuriating because they were purely lifestyle maintenance. When her washing machine broke, she called me instead of her boyfriend because you're so good with money stuff. When she wanted to take a vacation but had already maxed out her credit cards, she asked for a small loan that we both knew would never be repaid. The beauty of it all was how invisible I'd made myself in the process. I paid bills directly to companies, transferred money without fanfare, never kept receipts of their gratitude because there weren't any. I'd become their anonymous benefactor while simultaneously being treated as their ungrateful family burden. Now, as December progressed, the bills were coming due without their secret sponsor. My uncle called 6 more times about various oversights and confusion with bills he'd assumed I was handling. My mother left increasingly desperate voicemails about a credit card company that was suddenly demanding payment on a balance I'd been covering monthly for 8 months. The most telling response came from my sister, who texted, "Mom says you're not paying her car anymore? That's so petty. You know she can't afford it right now." I responded with a single message. I was told I'm not family anymore. Non-family members don't typically pay each other's bills. She didn't text back. By December 15th, I'd received 43 calls and messages about various financial emergencies, all of them bills and obligations I'd been silently covering while being treated like an unwanted burden. The irony was almost poetic. The family member who caused problems and made everyone uncomfortable had been financially supporting half of them for years. I calculated the numbers one final time. If I stopped covering their various obligations, I'd save over $900 a month. Money I could use for my own life, my own goals, my own future. Concepts that felt revolutionary after years of funding their comfort while being told I wasn't grateful enough for their reluctant acceptance. The best part was their complete shock at the consequences of their own actions. They'd expelled me from the family without considering that families help each other financially, that cutting someone off goes both ways. I was no longer their daughter, their niece, their sister, which meant I was no longer their ATM either. Christmas morning was quiet in a way I'd never experienced. No 6 a.m. phone calls asking me to help with last-minute preparations, no rushing across town to assist with cooking disasters, no arriving early to set up decorations only to be ignored once guests arrived. Instead, I woke up naturally at 9 a.m. in my own bed, made coffee in my peaceful kitchen, and opened a thoughtful gift from my father. A beautiful leather journal with a note that said, "For writing your own story from now on." My grandmother had invited me to Christmas dinner at her assisted living facility. It was small, intimate, and genuine in ways family gatherings had never been. Just me, her, my father, and 2 other residents who didn't have family nearby. We ate cafeteria food and played card games and laughed at my grandmother's stories about Christmas celebrations from decades past. "This is what family should feel like," my grandmother said as we shared dessert. "Comfortable. No walking on eggshells. No performing for approval, just being together because we want to be." Meanwhile, my phone buzzed occasionally with updates from the family I'd left behind. My cousin sent me screenshots from the group chat describing their Christmas disaster. Without me there to manage logistics, coordinate timing, or smooth over conflicts, their traditional gathering had devolved into chaos. My mother had burned the turkey because she'd never actually cooked the whole meal herself. I'd been doing most of the work for years while she took credit. My uncle had gotten drunk and argumentative without me there to redirect conversations and manage his moods. My sister's boyfriend had asked uncomfortable questions about why I wasn't there, leading to an awkward explanation that satisfied no one. "They argued about you for 2 hours," my cousin texted. "Mom kept saying you were ruining Christmas from a distance, and Uncle kept insisting they'd made the right choice. Meanwhile, the dinner was falling apart because nobody knew how you usually organized everything." The most revealing message came from my sister. "Can you just come over later? This is weird without you here. Mom's being impossible, and I don't know how to deal with her when you're not around to handle her moods." I stared at that message for a long time. Even in exile, I was expected to manage their emotional chaos. Even after being told I wasn't family, they wanted me to resume my role as the family's unpaid emotional labor coordinator. I didn't respond. Instead, I spent the afternoon writing in my new journal, processing the year that had changed everything. I wrote about the revelation that being needed and being wanted were different things, about learning to distinguish between love and manipulation, about the strange freedom that came with accepting rejection from people who had never truly accepted me in the first place. That evening, my father called to check on me. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm peaceful." "Good. That's what you deserve." "Dad, can I ask you something? Do you think I made the right choice? Sending those recordings, I mean?" "Maya, I think you finally stopped setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. That's never the wrong choice." As December wound down, the pattern became clear. My family's Christmas plans, New Year's preparations, and holiday social obligations were falling apart without my invisible support system. Phone calls became more desperate, messages more manipulative, attempts to guilt me back into compliance more transparent. But for the first time in my adult life, their chaos wasn't my emergency. Their poor planning wasn't my responsibility to fix. Their emotional meltdowns weren't my job to manage. I spent New Year's Eve with new friends, people I'd met through a hiking group I'd joined after realizing I had every weekend free, now that I wasn't constantly available for family obligations. We watched fireworks and made resolutions and talked about our hopes for the coming year. At midnight, as everyone around me celebrated new beginnings, I felt something I'd never experienced before: excitement about my own future. Not anxiety about how to make others happy or fear about whether I was doing enough to earn love, just genuine anticipation for what came next. For the first time in my life, I was the main character in my own story. January brought consequences I hadn't anticipated. The family fractures I'd exposed continued to spread, creating new alliances and revealing old resentments that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. My grandmother, emboldened by the support she'd seen for me, began sharing her own stories about my mother's behavior. Apparently, my mother's pattern of emotional manipulation extended far beyond her treatment of me. My grandmother revealed years of criticism disguised as concern, financial pressure, and attempts to control her social relationships. "I never said anything because I thought it was just how families worked," she told me during one of our weekly coffee dates, a new tradition we'd started. But watching how people responded to your situation made me realize it wasn't normal. It wasn't okay. Other family members began reaching out with their own stories. An aunt I barely knew called to tell me about how my mother had systematically excluded her from family events after a minor disagreement 5 years ago. A cousin shared how my uncle had spread rumors about his business to undermine a construction contract, forcing him to leave town to find work. The most shocking revelation came from my father's sister, who'd been estranged from the family since my parents' divorce. She sent me a long email explaining why she'd disappeared. My mother had told everyone that she was jealous of our perfect family and had been spreading lies about our marriage. In reality, she'd tried to warn my father about my mother's affair months before he discovered it himself. "I watched your mother destroy relationships for years," she wrote. "She can't tolerate anyone who threatens her control of the narrative. What she did to you was just the latest in a long pattern." These revelations created a clear division in our extended family. On one side were the people who'd witnessed or experienced my mother and uncle's manipulative behavior and were finally free to speak about it. On the other side were the family members who either benefited from the current power structure or were too afraid of conflict to take sides. My sister found herself in an impossible position. She'd built her identity around being the favored child, the successful one, the family golden child. With that dynamic exposed as artificial and cruel, she was forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about her own complicity. She sent me a letter in February, an actual handwritten letter, not a text or email. In it, she admitted that she'd known I was being treated unfairly, but had been afraid to speak up because she didn't want to lose her privileged position. "I was selfish," she wrote. "I let you take all the criticism and carry all the responsibility because it made my life easier. I told myself that you were stronger than me, that you didn't mind helping, that it was just your personality. But I knew better. I've always known better." The letter was a start, but it wasn't enough to repair years of damage. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing isn't the same as amends, and I wasn't ready to resume a relationship based on her convenience. My mother's response to the family upheaval was predictably dramatic. She sent me a certified letter in March threatening legal action for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The letter, written by what was clearly a bargain basement lawyer, demanded I retract all false statements and cease and desist from further harassment of family members. I showed the letter to my father, who laughed out loud. She's threatening to sue you for playing recordings of her own words? Good luck with that defense. The legal threat backfired spectacularly. Several family members who'd been staying neutral decided that threatening lawsuits against your own daughter for exposing emotional abuse was a line too far. My mother's support network shrank to just my uncle and a couple of his drinking buddies. More importantly, the threat crystallized something for me. My mother wasn't sorry about how she'd treated me. She wasn't embarrassed by her behavior. She was angry that I'd exposed it. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of her cruelty, her primary concern was controlling the narrative and avoiding accountability. The letter made it clear that reconciliation was impossible, not because I was unwilling to forgive, but because she was unwilling to acknowledge there was anything to forgive. By spring, two distinct family networks had emerged. The old guard, my mother, uncle, and their few remaining allies, continued their pattern of gossip, manipulation, and emotional warfare. The rest of us, grandmother, father, several aunts and cousins, and extended family members, began building relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation and fear. I finally understood what healthy family relationships looked like, and why I'd felt so exhausted for so many years. I'd been trying to force genuine connection with people who were fundamentally incapable of it, while neglecting the family members who'd been waiting all along to love me without conditions. A year later, I barely recognized the person I used to be. The woman who drove to that Thanksgiving dinner expecting crumbs and calling them love seems like a stranger to me now. I'm writing this from my new apartment, a bright, airy place that I chose because I loved it, not because it was convenient for helping family members with their various needs. The walls are decorated with photos of hiking trips, dinner parties with genuine friends, and quiet moments of contentment that I never thought I'd experience. The journal my father gave me last Christmas is filled with entries chronicling this transformation. Pages about learning to say no without guilt, about discovering what I actually enjoyed when I wasn't constantly managing other people's emotions, about the strange luxury of having weekends free to pursue my own interests. I've started writing professionally, freelance articles about family dynamics, emotional abuse, and the journey to self-worth. My first published piece, The Invisible Family Member, resonated with thousands of readers who recognized their own experiences in my story. The response was overwhelming. Emails from people who'd lived similar lives, thank you notes from others who found the courage to set their own boundaries, messages from therapists who shared the article with clients struggling with toxic families. My dating life has transformed too. When you stop accepting crumbs from family, you become unable to accept them from romantic partners. I'm seeing someone now, a kind, emotionally available person who treats me with the respect I thought was reserved for other people. He's never met my mother or uncle, and he never will. Some boundaries are non-negotiable. Let me tell you what happened to each person in this story because closure matters. My mother continues living in her too expensive house, but now she pays her own bills. She's had to downsize her lifestyle significantly and frequently posts on social media about the ungrateful children who abandon their families. She has very few friends left. Most people grew tired of her constant victim narrative and need for drama. My uncle lost one of his rental properties to tax foreclosure and had to sell another to pay debts. His drinking got worse after losing his free financial support system, and he's become increasingly isolated. He still insists he did nothing wrong, but his own children barely speak to him anymore. My sister moved across the country for a job opportunity, but I suspect she was also fleeing the wreckage of our family's reputation in town. She sends me birthday cards now with generic messages about hoping we can reconnect someday. I appreciate the gesture, but trust is earned, not inherited. My cousin, the one who invited me to that fateful dinner, is thriving. She moved in with my grandmother after graduating college, and they've become each other's chosen family. She visits me regularly, and we've built the kind of relationship I always wanted with a sister. My father and I have weekly dinners now. He's dating someone nice who treats me like a daughter from the start, not someone who has to earn acceptance. He's more involved in my life than he's ever been, and he frequently apologizes for the years he stayed silent. I've forgiven him because he did the work to change. My grandmother is my hero. At 83, she decided she was too old to waste time on fake family harmony. She speaks her mind now, stands up for people being mistreated, and has become a fierce advocate for authenticity in relationships. She's the matriarch our family needed all along. As for me, I'm finally living my own life instead of servicing everyone else's. I have hobbies, goals, dreams that belong to me alone. I've learned that being alone is better than being with people who make you feel lonely. I've discovered that saying no to the wrong people creates space for the right ones to find you. The most unexpected gift of this whole experience was discovering that I'm actually quite likable when I'm not desperately trying to prove my worth. When you stop performing for acceptance, you attract people who accept you as you are. Sometimes people ask if I regret sending those recordings, if I wish I'd tried to work things out differently. The answer is always no. That Thanksgiving dinner, humiliating as it was, gave me the gift of absolute clarity. There's immense power in stop pretending that cruelty is love, that obligation is affection, that being needed is the same as being valued. I grieved the family I thought I had, then celebrated the family I actually deserved. Some of them had been there all along, just waiting for me to stop chasing people who were never going to choose me back. Today, I choose myself. Every single day, I choose myself. And for the first time in my life, that feels like enough.